right, so today we're diving deep into Goa's tourism industry. Pretty hot topic right now, huh?
Yeah, it's interesting. There are a lot of different perspectives on this.
We've got this YouTube video from Akash Banerjee's channel, The Deshbakt, featuring a discussion with Mohit. We're going to use that to kind of unpack what's going on.
Yeah, sounds good.
Apparently, Goa's tourism is facing some serious challenges, especially when it comes to international travelers.
Yeah, that seems to be the main takeaway.
People are saying that Goa's kind of lost its magic touch. But before we jump into the nitty-gritty, I think it's important to set the stage a little bit.
Right, so
I mean, Goa was once considered like a top tourist destination. People flock there from all over the world, drawn to the beaches, the nightlife.
right. And that unique blend of Indian and Portuguese culture. There's nowhere else in the world quite like it.
It sounds incredible, honestly like a dream vacation spot.
Yeah.
But the situation seems to have changed quite a bit.
Yeah, sadly, that's what we're seeing.
This video paints a pretty stark picture of decline, especially for international tourists who, at one point considered Goa like a second home.
Right. It's really interesting to see how things have shifted.
And, this isn't just like some isolated opinion. I mean, remember all the buzz around Ramanuj Mukherjee's comments on X?
Oh, yeah. Formerly Twitter, right.
Yeah, exactly. He basically called out the issues plaguing Goa's tourism, and let's just say it sparked quite a backlash.
There was definitely a lot of back and forth. Some people agreed with him. Some people were furious.
Well, yeah, I mean, tourism's a huge part of Goa's economy, so these criticisms hit a nerve.
Makes sense.
But his experience kind of highlights the sensitivity surrounding this topic, right?
For sure. It shows that people are really invested in the future of Goa's tourism, but that there are very different views on how to get there.
So one of the main points the video makes is that Goa is now facing some fierce competition
Yeah.
from other destinations that offer similar experiences.
Places like Thailand, Sri Lanka, even destinations in Central Asia are becoming increasingly popular.
It seems these destinations are attracting tourists, especially international ones, with things like easier visa processes and the promise of a more budget-friendly experience.
Right. And it's not just about cost. There's a perception that these other destinations offer maybe just a better overall tourist experience.
But the video doesn't just focus on competition, right? It also gets into some of the issues that tourists are actually facing on the ground in Goa.
Yes. And that's where things get really interesting, I think.
So let's dive into that. What are some of the problems that tourists are encountering?
Well, one major issue that's highlighted is cyber fraud.
Oh no, scams. Really?
Sadly, yeah. Especially those unfamiliar with Indian booking practices can be easy targets.
Yeah, that makes sense. When you're in a new place, you don't know which websites are legit.
Exactly.
So tourists can end up booking fake hotels or falling for misleading advertisements or believing online reviews that are totally bogus.
All of those things.
That's awful. You finally arrive in Goa, excited for your vacation, only to realize you've been tricked.
Well, it can definitely put a damper on the whole trip.
And it seems like that's not the only problem. There's also the issue of, what's it called? The taxi mafia.
Yeah, that's a big one. Getting around in Goa can be a real headache for tourists, thanks to this group.
They pretty much control transportation, right?
They do, and they've been very resistant to app-based ride services like Uber and Ola. So tourists are often at their mercy.
Which means they're probably stuck paying inflated prices.
Pretty much. It creates this negative first impression, and it's not really a great way to start your vacation.
And to make matters worse, there's also a lack of affordable public transportation options.
Yeah, if you can't afford the taxis and there are no buses or trains to rely on, it severely limits your ability to explore.
Especially for those who are traveling on a budget.
Right.
So we've got scams to worry about, expensive transportation, limited ways to get around. What about safety concerns? I mean, is Goa a safe place for tourists?
Well, the video brings up some pretty conflicting narratives, particularly when it comes to the drug problem in Goa.
Yeah, I've heard about that.
On the one hand, you have the Goa Director General of Police basically denying the existence of a drug mafia. But on the other hand, you've got news reports that directly contradict that claim.
Yikes. Talk about mixed messages.
It's confusing, right? And this disconnect can really erode trust and make tourists feel uneasy.
Makes sense. If there's a gap between what officials are saying and what's actually happening, it's hard to feel secure.
Exactly.
And it seems like the issue goes beyond just drugs. There are anecdotes in the video that suggest that some locals might be less welcoming to tourists than they used to be.
Yeah, there's this story about a local entrepreneur who reacted pretty aggressively to a tourist's criticism.
Wow, really? So there seems to be a shift in attitude.
Well, it's hard to say for sure. It could be a few isolated incidents, but it does raise questions about whether tourists are still as welcomed as they once were.
I wonder what's driving that change.
Well, there could be a lot of factors at play. Maybe some resentment towards tourists or concerns about the impact of tourism on local culture.
I guess it's understandable. If you feel like tourism is changing your community in ways you don't like, it can create tension.
Yeah. And to fully grasp the situation, I think we need to consider the role of government policies. They play a huge part in shaping the tourism experience.
Right. Policies can either make things easier or harder for tourists. So let's talk about that. What's going on with the government's role in all of this?
Well, the video is pretty critical of some of the policies, or lack thereof, that seem to be contributing to these issues.
Okay, so what are some of the specific things that are being called into question?
For one, there's the lack of regulation of taxi fares.
Oh yeah, the taxi mafia situation.
Exactly. The government hasn't done much to control pricing, which leaves tourists vulnerable to being overcharged.
And there's also the e-visa process for foreigners, which apparently is pretty complicated.
Yeah, and time-consuming, too. It just adds another layer of hassle for people trying to visit Goa.
So we've got policies that benefit the taxi mafia, a complex visa process. Anything else?
Well, the video also points out the government's ambitious target of attracting 100 million foreign tourists by 2047.
Wow, that's a pretty lofty goal, considering the current challenges.
Right, makes you wonder if it's actually achievable.
But what seems even more concerning is the government's response to these issues.
Yeah, the video suggests that there's a tendency towards denial and blame shifting.
Like they're not acknowledging the problems.
It seems like it. For instance, the Goa chief minister has downplayed the issues and focused on the increase in domestic tourism.
So they're saying, oh, it's okay, we're getting more Indian tourists, so it doesn't matter if international tourism is declining.
It seems that way. But it's a bit of a Band-Aid solution, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, if you're not addressing the root causes of the decline, it's hard to see how things will improve in the long run.
You've got that right.
So let me just recap here. We've got competition from other destinations, scams targeting tourists, expensive and unreliable transportation, potential safety concerns, a maybe less than welcoming local attitude in some cases, and government policies that, well, aren't really helping.
That about sums it up. It's a pretty complicated picture, for sure.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack. It definitely makes you wonder about the future of Goa's tourism.
It does.
But before we jump to conclusions, I think it's important to remember that this is just one perspective.
Absolutely.
There are other voices, other viewpoints out there. And to get a more complete understanding, we need to consider all sides of the story.
For sure. There are a lot of people working hard to address these issues and find solutions.
Right, so it's not all doom and gloom. And that's exactly what we'll be exploring in the next part of our deep dive.
We'll look at potential solutions and what needs to be done to revive Goa's tourism, so stay tuned.
Definitely. We've got a lot more to discuss.
Okay, so we've talked about the problems, but what about solutions? Can Goa's tourism industry actually be revived?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, after hearing all that, it's easy to feel kind of pessimistic.
Right, it's a lot to process.
But the video does offer some potential solutions, so it's not all doom and gloom.
Yeah, there's definitely hope.
What are some of the key takeaways? Where do we even begin to address all these issues?
Well, it's not going to be easy. There's no quick fix, that's for sure.
Right.
Goa needs like a comprehensive approach, something that tackles the root causes of the decline.
Okay, so what would that look like?
Well, the video emphasizes the importance of reestablishing a safe and welcoming reputation for tourists.
That makes sense. I mean, if people don't feel safe or welcome, they're not going to come back or recommend Goa to others.
Exactly. It's all about rebuilding trust.
So how do we do that?
It's going to require action on multiple fronts. Cracking down on scams, increasing safety measures, just making sure that visitors have a positive experience from start to finish.
Okay, so it's about creating a sense of security and hospitality. But who's responsible for making that happen?
Well, the government has a huge role to play.
In what way?
Well, think about it. They could implement stricter regulations, especially when it comes to the taxi mafia.
Right, like setting price controls or something.
Exactly. And they could actively promote app-based ride services, create a more level playing field.
That would definitely make transportation more affordable and transparent.
Yeah. And imagine if they invested in a reliable public transportation system.
Oh, yeah, that would be a game changer.
It would make Goa so much more accessible, especially for budget-conscious travelers.
Okay, so that's transportation. What about the visa process? I mean, that was another big issue that came up.
The video suggests streamlining the e-visa process for international visitors.
Right, making it simpler and faster.
Yeah. It just removes a barrier for people who want to visit. It shows that Goa is open and welcoming.
Makes sense. So we've addressed safety, transportation, visas. What about diversifying Goa's tourism offerings?
That's a crucial point. Goa's got so much more to offer than just beaches and nightlife.
Right, it's got a rich history and culture.
Exactly. There's potential for ecotourism, adventure tourism, heritage walks, culinary experiences.
Yeah, I love that. Showcasing the authentic Goa, not just the touristy facade.
It's about attracting a different kind of traveler, someone who's looking for a more immersive experience.
And who's willing to spend money on those experiences.
Exactly. It's not just about quantity, it's about quality.
Okay, so attracting the right kind of tourists. But how do we ensure that tourism benefits the local community and doesn't just line the pockets of big corporations?
That's where responsible tourism comes in.
What does that mean in the context of Goa?
It means encouraging tourists to respect local customs, support local businesses, minimize their environmental impact.
It's about being a conscious traveler.
Exactly. Leaving a positive footprint, not just taking selfies and moving on.
I love that. It shifts the focus from consumption to connection.
And it requires a shift in mindset from both tourists and locals.
Right, it's a two-way street.
Everyone needs to be invested in creating a sustainable tourism ecosystem.
It sounds like a lot of work, but also a really exciting opportunity to reimagine what tourism in Goa could be.
I agree. It's about finding that sweet spot, that balance between economic growth and cultural preservation.
But can Goa actually pull this off? I mean, there are a lot of challenges to overcome.
That's the million-dollar question. And to answer it, I think we need to look at the bigger picture.
What do you mean?
Well, are these challenges unique to Goa, or are we seeing similar trends playing out in other tourist destinations around the world?
That's a good question. It makes you wonder if Goa's situation is just a microcosm of a much larger trend.
Maybe. It's something to think about.
Yeah, let's explore that now. What are your thoughts on that? So are these challenges unique to Goa, or are other popular destinations kind of facing the same struggles?
That's a great question, and it's what makes this whole deep dive so interesting. Goa's situation, it kind of gives us like a window into the pressures that tourist destinations all over the world are dealing with.
I see what you mean.
Like, think about it. Budget airlines, online travel platforms, it's all made it so much easier and cheaper to travel the world.
Yeah, that's true. It's never been easier to hop on a plane and go somewhere new.
Right. But that also means it's way more competitive for the destinations themselves.
Makes sense. If everyone's offering like sun and sand or a party scene, it's harder to stand out.
Exactly. Tourists are getting more savvy. They're looking for something more than just the typical tourist traps. They want like authentic cultural experiences, meaningful connections with the places they visit.
So destinations need to offer something unique, something beyond the usual.
Exactly. And more that something is sustainability.
Oh yeah, I've noticed that like eco-friendly accommodations, responsible wildlife, tourism, community-based initiatives.
Exactly. Tourists are more aware of their impact, and they want to know that their money is going towards something positive.
It's like a win-win for everyone. The tourists get a great experience and the local community benefits.
Exactly. But finding that balance, attracting visitors while still preserving the culture and environment, that's the tricky part.
You know, in the video, they mentioned that Goa kind of reached its peak without government support, but now it needs intervention to move forward. Is that common in other places?
It's a pattern you see a lot. Destinations often thrive organically, driven by the passion of the local people.
Yeah, I could see that.
But then as tourism grows, the government needs to step in and provide the infrastructure and regulations to support sustainable growth.
Things like public transportation, waste management, protecting natural resources, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. And just as importantly, involving local communities in the decision-making process, making sure that they're actually benefiting from tourism.
Right. It can't just be about profits for big corporations.
No, it has to be a collaborative effort, everyone working together to create a win-win situation.
So Goa's experience has some valuable lessons for other destinations dealing with similar challenges.
Absolutely. It highlights the need for a balanced approach to tourism, recognizing it as an economic driver, but also being mindful of its impact.
It's not just about getting more tourists, it's about getting the right kind of tourists.
Well said. The kind of tourists who respect the local culture, who are responsible travelers, who contribute positively to the destination.
And for you, with your interest in Goa, I think this raises a really important question.
What's that?
Can Goa strike that balance? Can it attract tourists while still preserving its unique character?
It's a tough question, and the decisions made today will shape the future of Goa.
This deep dive has really opened my eyes to all the complexities. It's a fascinating story, but also a cautionary tale.
It is, and for all our listeners out there, I think the takeaway here is to be mindful travelers. Your choices matter.
Absolutely support sustainable practices, respect local communities, advocate for responsible tourism.
You have the power to make a positive impact, and who knows, maybe you'll be inspired to experience Goa's magic for yourself.
Just remember to do your research, choose responsible operators, travel mindfully.
That's great advice.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Goa's tourism. It's been a really insightful journey.
It has. Thanks for having me.